Thank you, Lauren. I'm really happy to be here today. And I'm trying to figure out the clicker. Okay. I'm really happy to be here today. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for having me as part of today's event. It really means a great deal. Who defines what is waste? Is it the person who throws something out? Or is it the person who looks at that thing that's been thrown out and decides that, hey, I can reuse it? If I toss this charger into the trash and say it's e-waste, am I right? Or is the person who pulls it out and says, hey, wait a second, I can reuse that? Are they correct? This is the question that's really troubled me the last few years. And I think it has a really big impact on how we build circularity, not just in developed economies, but developing economies. So long as developed economies, the person who throws something away gets to say what is waste, we are going to miss the opportunity to look at emerging markets where they have look at waste differently, see reuse, repair, and other options before we do. Now, as Lauren said, I like to make my arguments via anecdotes. So today, I'm going to tell you a couple stories that hopefully highlight how we can start thinking about circularity differently, about who should be defining waste, and perhaps expand the options of circularity for the environment and for social good. Okay, this is a photo taken in the early 2000s of a gentleman by the name of Robin Ingenthron, who's an electronics recycler in Middlebury, Vermont. He's getting these monitors, these are used computer monitors, ready to go to China. Now, if I say recycle monitors in China, a lot of people are going to have an image along these lines. This is a screen grab from a very famous 60 Minutes episode called The Electronics Wasteland. And when I first heard in the early 2000s, when I was reporting on e-waste in China about people from the United States sending devices to China, I thought this is what was going on. But I also knew enough about the recycling industry to know that at least from a business perspective, it didn't make a lot of sense for somebody in China to spend money importing monitors, pay the taxes on them, pay the bribes on them, and then still extract value via the raw materials. The money wasn't there. So I started looking around. And the first thing I knew was you don't go looking in someone's backyard to figure out what somebody's doing with waste. You need to go in their warehouse. So here's what both Robin and I found in the early 2000s that was happening with these monitors. They were going to large scale factories where they were being disassembled with the idea that they would be refurbished and resold. Robin at one point was selling to a buyer in Los Angeles who was buying 5,000 monitors per day to send them back to China. Why didn't we hear about this? Because it's how we define the waste. Somebody in China was looking at these and saying, hey, we can refurbish them. But somebody at 60 Minutes was looking at these and saying, well, in China, they're certainly not capable of doing what I'm about to show you, which is they would recalibrate these monitors, recalibrate them for other markets, for other voltages, with the idea that they could be resold. And then once they were done working on these, they would be repackaged and they would be shipped all around the world, including to the United States, as essentially what are called white label goods. That is basically a generic monitor. But that's circularity in motion. And it was circularity in the early 2000s. Why did it go away? Well, one reason was China's new goods manufacturers of new monitors, didn't like competing against lower cost used monitors, refurbished monitors. The second reason is we had regulation in places like the EU and the United States saying exporting monitors to developing countries leads to pollution. Now, there is certainly pollution associated with the trade, but there is also wonderful circularity. It's quite possible that if you were using a CRT, an old monitor like you would use in the 2000s, and you bought it from a store that sells white label, it was a reused monitor. All right, so how did 60 Minutes get it so wrong? Again, it's their frame of reference. They only assumed one way of thinking about the waste that was going to China. And that's a pity because it not only had a huge influence on how regulators and regular Americans and corporations thought about this waste, but it had a real impact on how China could reduce its own footprint in terms of waste, pollution, and other externalities. Now, what happens to the other parts? Of course, everything dies out eventually. Well, if you go to China, if you go to Guiyu, which is where 60 Minutes went, back, say, about 10 years ago, you would find a place that isn't just about reusing and refurbishing monitors. It's also about refurbishing parts. Here, once again, is what happens when you go inside a warehouse instead of just looking in the backyard. These are piles of circuit boards that came from Samsung phones. They are basically overstock from a factory. They were bought out of the factory, pulled into a factory, and they were taken apart in this factory. And what will happen to them? They aren't going to be burned like we saw in 60 Minutes. Instead, they were segregated, and they were, again, looked at not as waste, not as stuff that needed to be burned for various raw materials like copper and gold, but they were looked at items that could be resold. And in fact, in the world's largest electronics recycling graveyard, which is what southern China was called, there was and still is a huge market for the reuse of components. In fact, if you buy toys, unbranded toys from South China to this day, odds are that you have reusable chips inside of them. And those aren't just imported, they're also from China, because China is the world's largest user and waster of electronics. But they have, instead of saying these items are waste, they've said they contain reusable components and we are going to reuse them. And the trade is huge. This is the SEG Plaza in the middle of Huaqiangbei in Shenzhen. It's one of the world's largest and most important chip markets. And people from all over China come there, not just to buy new chips, but it's where you go to find, say, a 15-year-old chip, because somebody, say, in Guiyu has 10,000 of them from scrapping out old phones. It's perfectly circular. And it really leads to tremendous amounts of technical innovation. There's a market within Huaqiangbei where all there are is 3 floors of parts for iPhones extracted from e-waste and some factory overstock. And in that market, and this is a picture of it, and they didn't like you taking pictures in it, but you can see what's going on here. They are repairing and in some cases making new phones. Now, I do not countenance fraud, but one thing I do countenance is reusing stuff instead of recycling it. We all know the pyramid. Reuse comes before recycle, and they are doing that, and it's very circular. And if you don't believe me that this level of technical sophistication exists in China, there is a wonderful YouTube video showing how people can build their own iPhones from parts in Huaqiangbei. It's terrific. All right, let's go back to Vermont. This is Robin Ingenthrand's warehouse, Good Point Recycling in Middlebury. It's grown since he was shipping things to China. When I visited him a few years ago, and I stay in touch with him, he was now shipping things to Ghana, where he's found a market, and people wanted used televisions, and especially they wanted used computer monitors and used computers. Now, when I say Ghana, e-waste, a lot of folks think of this. This is a place called Agbogbloshie. In fact, if you Google Ghana e-waste, you're going to get pictures of this place. It too has been called the world's largest e-waste dump. It is not. In fact, it's primarily an automobile dump where you do get some electronics that's been used and reused for years in Ghana, but nobody at Agbogbloshie imports things because it wouldn't make sense. On a container, you spend $7,000 minimum on duties. Why would you bring something into Ghana if it can't be profitable? What are the things you see burning in Agbogbloshie in the various documentaries? Mostly automobile harness wire and cables that have been stolen from power lines in Ghana. So where then were Robin's electronics, his computers, going? And these are reusable electronics. Let me introduce you to somebody who defines waste differently than the journalists and the organizations that have defined exported waste as waste. This is a delightful gentleman by the name of Olu Orga. He's from a place called Tamale, which is the capital of the northern region of Ghana. I spent quite a bit of time with Olu. After high school, he worked here in Agbogbloshie. And what he learned in Agbogbloshie wasn't how to burn things. What he learned was how to fix computers. And he began working with friends in Tamale to import computers. And what you see here isn't a photo that I took. It's actually a photo from WhatsApp, because when he gets a new shipment of computers, what he does is he takes a picture of himself with them, puts it on WhatsApp to all his friends and business partners, and says, come on down, buy these computers. Now, if you look at these are mostly older desktops, but there's huge demand for them. He and his partners supply computers to hospitals, to schools, to parents with kids who need a computer to connect to the internet. That's their market. And his market is also retailers. This is a used computer retailer that sells used American equipment in Accra. It's called Bougie Computers, and that's their inventory of laptops, some of the inventory of laptops. And it's really important to remember, in Ghana, probably 95% of the electronics and the electronic retail trade is secondhand. So this stuff is really important. Now, that's not just inventory. It's also repair parts. So if at Bougie Computers, they can't sell that computer and someone brings in a used computer, they're not going to go burn that used computer. Instead, maybe they will look on their shelf for a monitor that will fit that computer and they can then continue using it. So it's a way to extend lifespan. Again, a way to keep things out of the recycling chain and keep them circular. The longer you can reuse, the less carbon impact there is. That's what's going on in these markets, but it means we have to allow people like Olu to define what is waste, not necessarily regulators and corporations based in developed countries. All right, here is Robin's plant one more time. Robin has been watching this for a long time in Ghana. He travels there with some regularity. I've gone with him. And after being there, he said, you know what, this is a really smart business model that I can learn from. And so what he has done in his factory in Middlebury is basically set up disassembly stations. So computers, and especially flat screen televisions, for which there is no market in the United States. Maybe they're broken, so they shouldn't be sent overseas. He disassembles them there and he pulls the parts, and he has a thriving business selling those parts in North America and around the world. It's an idea that was inspired by what he saw in Ghana. And it's really important to keep in mind, this is a different way of defining waste. So instead of defining that flat screen television, the whole thing is something that needs to go to an electronics recycler, instead, it's looked at as an aggregation of potentially reusable parts. And all you have to do is go and look for the market for that parts, and you know which ones to pull. And it's a very, very profitable business. All right, on the right, you see Robin now, and on the left is one of his business partners, a wonderful gentleman by the name of Wahab Muhammad, who is from Tamale as well. He works with Olu in Tamale. And I happened to be at the plant when Wahab was there, and you see Wahab holding several circuit boards in his hands. Those are actually boards for television repair. One of the real struggles that Ghanaian repair technicians have is finding parts. You know, there are no new parts stores in Tamale, Ghana. It's a town of 50,000 people with a very low income level. You know, nobody's going to open that up. If you have a broken branded television, there's no authorized repair center. So the thing that keeps a television from being used and continue to be used is a lack of parts. So what Robin said is, look, I have these older parts that aren't selling to my regular customers in North America or South America. Wahab, tell me what you need. We'll pull them. And so Wahab came and he went through the parts and he says, let me take some samples. I'm going to bring a suitcase or two of samples back to my customers there who repair televisions and keep things going. Let's see if we can make it work. Again, it's an instance, and a very good one, of a Western developed business looking to emerging markets that define waste differently and saying, how can that model improve our circularity? We don't do that enough in North America, in my opinion. So my last picture is really kind of my favorite. This is a picture of Wahab on the right and a gentleman by the name of Wudupon on the left. Wudupon is one of the best, if not the best, television repair person in all of Ghana. He's based in Kumasi, which, if you know West Africa, Kumasi is the repair capital of all of West Africa. It's an extraordinary place to spend time. And he's one of the leaders of the Repair Technicians Union there, about 1,000 people. And so what Wahab has done is he's arranged a meeting with a Wudu in Tamale with Robin online. This is a screen grab from their conversation, going over the parts. And Wudu, who knows what Ghana needs, is talking to Wahab and Robin about doing this. Again, it's a beautiful circular economy model. But it all depends on who gets to define the waste. If those boards arrive at a recycler in North America, they're going to be defined as waste, and they're not going to be reused in Ghana or anywhere else. The good news is that there is at least one business up in Middlebury, Vermont, and it's not the only one. I know of many others who are starting to do this. The good news is that those businesses are taking their cue from the circular economies in emerging markets, places like Ghana, Benin, Nigeria, China, Malaysia, and creating a more circular economy that's more inclusive, that provides opportunities to people beyond just our immediate horizons, but deepens the engagement of everybody in what is a global sustainable movement. So thank you very much for having me today at Circularity. I hope we get the chance at some point to do this again, all in person. I get to meet folks in the audience. Lauren, thank you again, and I'll turn it back over to you.